First Sergeant Mikey Levin returned early to Israel from visiting his family in America to join his comrades following the outbreak of the Second Lebanon War in 2006. He fell fighting in southern Lebanon. Ari Abramowitz, former IDF soldier and director of the Land of Israel Network, will share with us his memories of Michael.
I always find it extraordinarily difficult to share my heart on Yom Hazikaron, not only with all of you, but with myself, to really share my heart, to really open up, because I've put up walls. I know I've put up walls, these subconscious barriers that prevent me from really feeling the pain, the searing, visceral pain and loss, the incalculable, unimaginable loss that we as the Jewish people have faced, not only since the foundation of Israel, all of the soldiers that have died, but civilians that have been murdered in terrorist attacks as well. The loss is beyond what we can ever imagine. Each individual precious soldier that's killed, every civilian that's murdered, was their own world. Weddings that would never happen, children that would never be born, lives that would never be lived. It's like a tree being severed at the root. Every one of them was an entire world. And then I look out at all of you. You've just arrived from the furnaces of Europe, where you vicariously witnessed the systematic annihilation of 6 million worlds. 6 million. 6 million lights put out. You've witnessed that. And now you've arrived in Israel, in the land of your fathers, your indigenous homeland that you've been exiled from for 2,000 years. You've arrived back home. And how are you greeted? You're greeted by 400 missiles shot from Gaza into Israel. 4 killed, hundreds wounded. You're greeted with the same genocidal hatred, unquenchable, irrational hatred that fueled Auschwitz to begin with. Not only here in Israel, not only in the Middle East, but around the world. From Pittsburgh to San Diego to Brussels to Paris, Jew hatred, anti-Semitism is rising like we haven't seen since the times of the Holocaust. I can imagine that many of you are putting up your walls as well. How could you not? Jewish history, even just recent Jewish history, the pain of it can be so overwhelming and unbearable. How can we not put up walls? But I think that is our job here tonight. Not only tonight, but tomorrow on all of Yom Hazikaron. With all of our might to take down those walls, to allow the pain in, to allow the tears to flow, to really experience the loss that we as the family of the Jewish people have faced. Because I believe, also from my experience and my faith, that on the other side of that wall lies light and love and inspiration that could change the entire course of our lives. There's so many stories that I want to tell you. I have limited time, but I don't even know how to choose. You know, my fellow soldiers, the ones that I feel the closest to, that hit the closest to home, I would want to start, and I have to start with Mikey Levin. How many of you have heard of Mikey? He's a legend in Israel, and he deserves to be. He was born in Philadelphia, the grandson of a Holocaust survivor, which I'm sure fueled his overwhelming passion to join the Israeli army. He got here to Israel, and they actually didn't let him in. They refused him. I don't really know the reasons why, but they refused him. And he scaled the walls of the induction center, climbed in, up the walls, jumped into the window of what ended up being one of the top officers of the induction center, who was obviously so moved by his tenacity and passion that they made an exception and they let him in. And he joined the paratroopers. The gibush, the tryouts for the paratroopers, were very difficult. I was always bigger and stronger than Mikey, but I didn't get in. He did. He got in. He had the heart of a lion. And when he got in, when it came time to actually parachute, to jump out of the airplane, they said that he couldn't do it because he was too light and the wind would just blow him away. So he said, don't worry about it. I'll just tie some sandbags to my legs. And that's what he did. When the Lebanon War broke out, he was in Philadelphia visiting his family. The war broke out and his parents begged him not to leave. His commanders told him he didn't need to leave. He could stay behind. But he jumped on the first plane. He wouldn't hear of it. Jumped on the first plane, went directly back to Israel. Fought his way back up to where his unit was in Lebanon, to the front lines. And he was shot and killed by a sniper in Lebanon. And then there's Yosef Goodman. I knew him since he was a little boy. Magnetic, charismatic, fantastic athlete. One of those guys that you didn't even have free will. You just had to love him. He was so good and such a Zionist. He got into the Maglan elite paratroopers unit, and he was jumping from the airplane, and his parachute got tangled with that of his commander. Moments to react. He selflessly cut off the strings of his own parachute, sacrificing his life to allow his commander to live. And then there's Rowi Klein. Rowi Klein is a legend of Israel. He was a Torah scholar, a man of kindness. He left behind his wife and his 2 children in that Lebanon war. And when he was in a bunker surrounded by his fellow soldiers, a grenade was thrown in. With seconds to react, he jumped on top of the grenade. And his last words were, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. There's Max Steinberg, Sean Carmelli, Alex Singer. There's so many more. The bravery, the courage, the selflessness. It's such a model. It's so inspiring and it's so uplifting. But then there's the terror victims. These are civilians that have been murdered by terrorists. In Israel, we remember them as well. Because as we see on the news, they say that Gaza is firing missiles indiscriminately into Israel. But we know that's not true. It's not indiscriminate. They are focusing with all of the precision that they can on the population centers to maximize the murder of men, women, and children. Their war is not with the IDF. Their war is with every single Jew living in Israel, and so we remember them as well. One of those that I carry with me, I'm dear friends with the family. Many of you have maybe heard of Koby Mandel. I don't have time to tell each one of these. There's entire stories I wish I could share. But he was just a little boy, 12 years old. He wasn't even bar mitzvahed yet. He was a great athlete as well. In dodgeball, when he would pick teams, he would always pick the weakest one. He was unusually kind for a 12-year-old. And one day, he and his friend Yosef Ishran, they skipped school. They had that mischievous bent to them, and they skipped school, and they went out to the Judean hills, and they went into one of the caves where terrorists came upon them and bludgeoned them to death so horribly that they could only be identified by their dental records. And then there's Dr. David Applebaum and his daughter Nava. Dr. Applebaum is known throughout Jerusalem. He's also a legend because you break your leg here in Israel, you can't go to the emergency room necessarily. There's Terem. Terem is set up. It's like a middle emergency room type of place where you can go and get excellent care. And he created that. He invented that. He brought it to the world. He brought it to Israel. And he and his daughter Nava, the night before her wedding, they went to Cafe Hillel. And a terrorist set off a bomb that killed them both. So unfortunately, there are new members of this holy congregation, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention that, which I'm still reeling from, which I've shed more tears than I can ever remember shedding in my entire adult life. And that was for a mentor of mine, a real hero, Ari Fuld. He was a real war hero. He was a real fighter. But he was also a man of tremendous chesed. He was a mentor because he was such a fierce Israel advocate. It's sort of what I do a little bit. But what I would look at Ari and I would say, you know what, he's on the job. I don't need to do it. He didn't care what people thought of them. He didn't care how many views he got on YouTube. He went out and he fought the good fight and he loved debating. He even had a show in Israel where he debated Peace Now. He was more on the right. He debated Peace Now. It was called Frenemies. Frenemies. Why was it called Frenemies? Because friends and enemies. He would always make sure that no matter how fierce the debate was, he went to his opponent. He said, this rift between us is only between ideas, not between us. We're family. We love each other. Nothing can come between that. He understood a lesson which many of us have lost over 2,000 years of the exile, that we're not a religion. We're not co-religionists. We're a family. And that transcends politics. It transcends geography. It transcends everything. We're a family. Well, between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur of this past year, ask anyone in the country where they were when they heard this news. They remember where they were. He was on the way to the grocery store to pick up food for Shabbat. His wife, Miriam, sent him a Shabbat shopping list, and he went to pick up food, and a terrorist came upon him, stabbed him in the back directly through the heart. According to doctors, he should not have lived even 10 seconds. But Ari would not leave the world in that way. And he turned around and he jumped over 2 concrete barriers as his primary artery was bleeding out, and he shot the terrorist before the terrorist was able to go and harm anyone else. There's so many stories I want to tell, but there's one story that I think is particularly relevant that will help all of us in this mission of taking our walls down. This is a story about a man named Hiam Shapiro and his son Baruch Shapiro. Hiam he endured the 7 levels of hell. Beyond what any of us could imagine, he was in the ghetto, liquidated from the ghetto, 4 different concentration camps. He lost his wife and 7 of his children. And when Buchenwald was liberated, all that was left of his entire family was he and his son Baruch. They spent a few years in a DP camp, and finally they're able to get on a ship on the way to the land of Israel. And they arrived in 1948 as Israel is undergoing a war for its very survival, overwhelming odds against the nascent state of Israel. And Baruch immediately volunteered for the army. They gave him a gun, they taught him how to shoot a few bullets, and they sent him to the front lines. And he fought with bravery. He fought under Yitzhak Rabin. He fought against the Arab siege of Jerusalem. He actually got a medal of honor, of valor for courage under fire. And then one fateful day, it happened. Now at the time his father, Chaim, was in a small apartment in Tel Aviv, and that delegation, that dreaded delegation of 3 army officers carrying that dreaded brown envelope were walking through to the building. People say that when they saw this delegation carrying this envelope, it was like seeing the angel of death pass by. And they came up to Chaim's apartment, and they gave him the envelope, and supposedly he couldn't even open it. He crumpled it and he just dropped it to the floor. Now the next day, hundreds of people gathered in Har Herzl at the funeral of Baruch. They didn't know Chaim or Baruch personally, but they heard this tragic story of a Holocaust survivor who lost everything but his one son. And an Arab's bullet was able to do what Hitler's crematoria were not. And now his entire line was ended. And so hundreds came out to mourn. And as Chaim stood there next to General Yigal Yadin, as they were lowering Baruch's body into the ground in Har Herzl, he began to sing. They thought he had lost it. Someone brought him water. And no, he said no. He kept singing. And he turned to everybody in the crowd. And he said, I want you to know I've been through hell like none of you can imagine. Within 1 year, I lost 70 family members. I lost 7 children. I lost my wife. I don't know where any of them are buried, and I don't know why any of them died. But my son Baruch, I know why he died. He died so the Jewish people can have a homeland in the land of Israel. And I know where he's buried. He's buried here in Jerusalem. And that's not a reason to cry. That's a reason to sing. At this point, I want to take this opportunity for one moment to thank the leadership of March of the Living, because it's so important. It's so important what you're doing. This trip, this mission, this journey. I remember my trip to the gas chambers, to Auschwitz, to Treblinka, to Birkenau. You know, before I had seen Schindler's List, I read The Diary of Anne Frank, but it was a little bit more abstract and academic for me. Being there, seeing it, experience it, made it so much more real and immediate. And it inspired me. It contributed to the inspiration which led me to join the Israeli army. Never again would we be led like sheep to the slaughter. Even when I was in Gaza and we had to dig trenches to defend this Jewish village behind us from Hamas infiltration, we had to dig trenches that would soon be barraged by mortars. I remember a wave of gratitude come over me when I was digging this trench, and I realized how many times throughout Jewish history have we had to dig trenches for ourselves to be executed into. And now I'm digging a trench to defend the nation of Israel in the land of Israel on behalf of the God of Israel. Ashreinu matov chalkeinu. What a merit, what a privilege to be a Jew in the world today. So I want to bless us that we're able to take our walls down tonight, to let the pain in, and to let the tears flow. Because on the other side of those walls is a light. The breath of the 6 million of the holy soldiers who sacrificed their lives for Israel, of the terror victims who sacrificed their lives in order to live here in Israel. Their breath comes through our mouth. And we can live life of vibrance and joy and meaning in the land of Israel because of them. Shalom.